All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to start with Jim's Joke of the Week, and thank you for any of those that are watching. Sorry that we weren't available last week. We just had all kinds of different people running around, but we're back better than ever this week. However, this will be our last for the year, and we will pick it back up again on January 4th, and I'll make sure you guys hear that announcement again at the end. But today we're going to go ahead and read Jim's Joke of the Week. It says, a little guy gets on a plane and sits next to the window. A few minutes later, a big, heavy, strong, mean, hulky guy plops down in the seat next to him and immediately falls asleep. The little guy starts to feel a little airsick, but he's afraid to wake the big guy up and asks if he can move aside to let him go to the bathroom. He knows he can't climb over him, so the little guy's sitting there just looking at the big guy, he's deciding what to do. Suddenly, the plane hits an air pocket and an uncontrollable wave of nausea passes through the little guy. He can't hold it any longer and just hurls all over the big guy's chest. About 5 minutes later, the big guy wakes up, looks down, and sees vomit all over him. So, says the little guy, are you feeling any better now? That's something I think I would try to pass. I try to get to do that too. All right, guys, we are in Ecclesiastes chapter 7. We're trugging right along, taking them chapters at a time. And I was talking to somebody, I think it was yesterday, and or maybe it was this morning, about the journey through Ecclesiastes and how informative it is and how practical it is, and how it just really just applies to so much in our lives as we kind of navigate, and to think about the length of how long ago it was written, and to see how there's still the same type of struggles and issues and problems, and even though maybe some of the landscape has changed, and maybe some of the people, the way people act and look are the same, the basics are still there, as we see sometimes, as far as the world goes, the futility of life can take place. But yet Solomon talks about it. Here we talk about Solomon as arguably one of the wisest people that ever lived. We know that he had tremendous wisdom, but he kind of says something that kind of had sparked an idea in a poet named Thomas Gray, and he said this. He said, alas, regardless of their doom, the little victims play, talking about kids. No sense have they of ills to come, nor care beyond today. Yet, why should they know their fate, since sorrow never comes too late? And happiness too swiftly flies, thought would destroy their paradise. No more where ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise. Solomon would probably agree with that person, especially as we hear him say, as we go back to Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 18, he says, for in wisdom is much grief, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. You see, why does it seem better to live in innocence and ignorance than to sometimes gain knowledge? We talked a little bit about it last week, that there are some dangers with having too much knowledge and gaining too much, because sometimes with every new technology or new scientific breakthrough, new medical breakthrough can sometimes open a Pandora's box to all kinds of problems. But here, Solomon seems to kind of flip the script on the value of wisdom and attaches some value to it. And I think it's important because at first he dismisses it and thinks that knowledge can be folly and it can be a curse sometimes to gain so much knowledge. But now he's telling us the value, and I think it's done in order, because he's downgrading he's actually kind of delineating the dangers of knowledge, but then he's also telling us the importance in chapter 7 of wisdom. He tells us that not all wisdom is bad, but that there's value in it. You see, in chapter 6, he tells us that even all of the wisdom in the world cannot solve all the mysteries. See, the problem is, and what Solomon is trying to get to us today is that sometimes we can gain so much knowledge and so much wisdom that it becomes our foundation. It becomes what we hold ourselves upon and what we cling to, what we feel secure in and safety in. But as Solomon talked to us last week, he said, trying to understand all the mysteries is impossible. It's frustrating, it's maddening, and it takes us down the dark hole. But he does point out that there are 3 positives, and he tells us in chapter 7 of the positives for having wisdom under the sun. So I'm going to give you 3 values of wisdom. Number 1, wisdom can make life better. Wisdom can make our lives better. Let's read this. Ecclesiastes 7, verse 1 begins with, a good name is better than a precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of one's birth. Better to go to the house of mourning than to the house of feasting. You guys need to really get this stuff, because when I first read it, I'm like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He is off his rocker, okay? And we'll unpack this in a second. For that is the end of all men, and the living will take it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by a sad countenance the heart is made better. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. It is better to hear the rebuke of the wise than a man to hear the song of fools. For the crackling of thorns under a pot is like the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fool. This is also vanity. Surely oppression destroys a wise man's reason, and a bribe debases the heart. The end of a thing is better than its beginning, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Do not hasten in your spirit to be angry, for anger rests in the bosom of fools. Do not say, why were the former days better than these? For you do not inquire wisely concerning this. Now listen, that's a lot to unpack. There's a lot of things in there, and a lot of things that really, when you read them at face value, if you're like me, you would disagree with those statements. You know, when you hear things like sorrow is better than laughter, and mourning is better than, and to be in the house of mourning is better than to be in the house of mirth, you know, and because we tend to think that, you know, it's good to be happy. But Solomon describes these better things that come from wisdom. And we're going to kind of break them down. The better things, number one, one of the better things is sorrow is better than laughter. We see that in verses 1 through 4. Think about it. If you were given a choice, wouldn't you rather go to a birthday party than to a funeral? I mean, I would. I mean, I do a lot of funerals, y'all. And I don't necessarily always like to deal. I'm honored to be part of the family, and I'm honored to help go through that process, and I'm glad I'm there for them. And whenever our family comes together with something like that happens, I'm glad that I'm going to have an opportunity to serve. But it's not necessarily one of my greatest joys in life. It's not something that I'm looking forward to do, because I don't like to deal with that stuff any more than anybody else does. But I want you to understand what he is saying in these things. Solomon's not against laughter. As a matter of fact, Proverbs, written by Solomon, 17:22 says, a merry heart does good like a medicine. So he tells us that a merry heart, that to be happy and to have joy is good in your life. But what Solomon is pointing out is the importance of the sobriety of sorrow. The sobriety that takes, it's a wake-up call sometimes, and it helps us to realize our need or our dependence. You see, Solomon says that a good name is better than a precious ointment. He leads with that in verse 1, doesn't he? And he points out that the day of one's birth is not as good as maybe the day of one's death. And I thought about that. Why would when you talk about the birth is the beginning. And he said, but it's better to have the day of one's death. And I put this in your notes. When you are born, you're given a name. That's what he says. He says you're given a name. But as we live our lives, we are creating a name for ourselves. There's 2 significant announcements in a person's life. It's the announcement of their birth, and it's their obituary. And what we do in between that time is up to us. What with the name we make, it makes a name for us. what we do in between those moments, that birth announcement and that death announcement or that obituary, is what makes up our name. You see, I've said this several times in different funerals. You know, you see sometimes that headstone out there at the gravesite, and you'll see the year somebody's born, the year somebody passed, the date. In between is that dash. Very small, maybe seems insignificant, but that dash represents their life. It talks about the brevity of life, but it also talks about the importance of life. What we do in that short amount of time that we're given here on this earth matters incredibly. It's what makes up our name. You see, Solomon, it points out that life lived between these two moments. I put this in your notes. Life that is lived between these two moments are the fragrance that we give off to the world. I want you to think about this. I'm going to read some names to you. And I want you to think about the fragrance or the mentality you think when you hear that name. Maybe a name like Adolf Hitler. Think about that name for a second. Think about that name as we think about that, what he had done or accomplished or done terribly in history. What fragrance we might think of when we think of that name. That is his legacy that he has left based on the name we hear. How about a Mother Teresa? The name, the fragrance that we would maybe smell or talk about when we think about that name. How about Charles Manson? You know, I mean, I can just see some of the faces, you know, when we read off that name. Or Billy Graham. You see, these are names of prominent people throughout history. Whether they were famous for being maybe pure evil, or maybe they were famous for being really good. But those names that they made for themselves, those names, and I put this in your, I know I didn't put this in your notes, but I saw this and somebody said, it says, we were all given 3 names in our lives. The one our parents gave us, that's the name we were given. The one others call us, whether it's to our face or not. And then the one we earned for ourselves throughout our lives. Another name you could think of is Mary, maybe the mother of Jesus. The name that you think of, especially in some denominations / religions, the esteem that she holds. And then maybe you could think of the name of Judas. See, Judas, actually, the name given to him by his parents, translated means praise. And I guess when I think about all those names, I think about what is my fragrance and what is your fragrance. You say, well, I've been working all day. My fragrance isn't so good right now. But what is the name? When they say Juan, what do people think of when they say Juan? Or Jody? Or Renee? Kelly? What is in that name that people will associate? They're not just associating the name and saying, hey, I'm Juan Bridget's husband. They're associating your character, your life is made up in that name. And it represents what people think and know of who you are. Proverbs 10:7 says, the memory of the righteous is blessed, but the name of the wicked will rot. Solomon says in verse 4 that wisdom is in the house of mourning and foolishness in the house of mirth. House of mourning, where would we see the house of mourning be? Where would we normally go for a funeral or to mourn? Many times it's in this facility right here. And where would we go to a place of mirth that's known? I looked it up because I didn't know what mirth meant, you know. It's a place of revelry. I think maybe we could probably think of a establishment that there's a lot of maybe foolish laughter that goes on in it, you know. And think about it. Why would this make any sense of all? Why would it make sense to gain more wisdom in a house of mourning than in a place of revelry? See, when we understand that in the house of mourning, we find meaning and purpose. If we have to understand the ending of it all, that one day we all will pass. We understand the purpose and the meaning what our lives should be. But when we go to a place of mirth, really honestly, many people just go there to escape. They go there to forget. They try to forget their problems. They try to forget their life. They try not to think about anything that's going on wrong. Another thing is, rebuke is better than praise. Think about that. How is rebuke better than praise? How is being rebuked better than being praised for something? Solomon compares the song of fools to the crackling of thorns in a fire. You may hear a lot of noise, but you're not going to see much heat. It's not going to last very long. And I put this in your notes. A wise person's rebuke may hurt, but it will take you farther than empty, flattering praises. Have you heard the term flattery will get you nowhere? Why? Well, because it doesn't help us grow. It doesn't help us learn. It just makes us feel good. And that's maybe why we enjoy it more, but it doesn't take us into a better direction. You see, Solomon learned this probably from his father David. He says in Psalms 41:5, "Let the righteous strike me. It shall be my kindness. Let him rebuke me. It shall be as an excellent oil. Let my head not refuse it." I put this in your notes. Correction leads to correction. You're like, wow, that's really profound. Thanks for telling me that. Correction leads, if we are being corrected, it leads us to correction. Every month I write an article for the paper, and before I send it, I take it through a program called Grammarly. Anybody ever heard of Grammarly? Grammarly it hurts my feelings. Grammarly hurts my feelings. It's an editing software where it takes your work and it begins to tell you, first of all, I just thought when I first got it, it would tell me I need to do punctuation here, there. I missed a capitalization here, that. It tells me my whole sentence was wrong. It's passive. I don't care if it's passive. Maybe I'm a passive guy. Maybe I like to write passive sentences. You know? But it tells me, and I'm just like, it'll say your overall score to start off with is a 75, and I'm thinking, I just got a C on this I wrote. I'm writing this for fun. It's not for a grade. It's for fun. Then it underlines all the things I need to correct. You should say this word differently. You've said that word too many times. You need to rephrase this. You need to take the passiveness out of this phrase. You need to rewrite that whole paragraph. It gives suggestions, and as I click on it, and it corrects things simply for me. It tells me, and sometimes it just says, I don't even know what to do. You need to rewrite that. So I'm fighting with Grammarly. I'm saying, you're an idiot. No, you're an idiot. No, you're an idiot. You know, and so we're going. But when I finally get it finished, usually there's some things that I just refuse to change because of my artistic creation. That's right. You can't control me, Grammarly, you know. And so I usually end up with a 99. I don't think I've ever ended up with 100. I usually end up with a 99. And sometimes I end up with a 99 because I put a Bible verse in there, and they try to correct the Bible, and I'm letting them do that. They're not correcting the Bible. The Bible's flawless, inspired by God, you know. So I think you can just leave that Grammarly, you know. Maybe Grammarly needs a little Jesus in them. But it hurts to be rebuked sometimes. It hurts, but in the end, and you know what's happening? Now when I write stuff, I know that I'm going to have to turn it into Grammarly first, which, by the way, is just a program, okay? But my passive sentences have decreased. They haven't stopped altogether, but they've decreased because I realize starting a sentence with this or something like that starts a passive sentence and it's not clear. And so I begin to learn that, and I'm maybe writing a little better because of knowing that it's going to be edited. It's going to change, and I get less and less corrections as I turn them in. And if I just turned it into that program and it said, you did great, and I just turned it in and it wasn't corrected, I would never grow as a writer. Rebuke should be, when we take it in a healthy way, better than praise. Correction leads to correction. False praise puts you nowhere. False praise leads us to nowhere because we don't think we need to change. If everybody tells you you're good, how about all those people that you see that try out for American Idol that are terrible? You know why they're trying out for American Idol? Because somewhere along the way, somebody told them, maybe with good intentions that loved them, told them that they were good. They said, oh, you sing so pretty. You ought to be on American Idol. And they go in and they can't carry a tune with a handle on it. They go in and they are terrible. But yet somebody told them they're good. And then finally they get to where somebody tells them, no, you're not. And it hurts even worse. And now it's on national television. You see? We have to understand that rebuke and correction leads to correction. Praise, false praise especially, leads us nowhere. The next better is, and this one is, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on because we should know this. The long haul is better than a shortcut. We all get that. We live in southeast New Mexico. We understand that. Sometimes things take a little bit longer, but they're better for the long run. Have you ever taken the easy route only to find that it becomes a more expensive detour? Oh, yeah, you can just do this. It's a shortcut, and then all of a sudden it's costing you more and taking more time than you originally thought. You see, I put this in your notes. The journey can often be long and difficult. Shortcuts can compromise our character. Shortcuts can compromise our integrity. And shortcuts can compromise our destination. The next better is, and I love this one, is today is better than yesterday. I know somebody don't think that, but today is better than yesterday. Why? Because we can't go back to yesterday. Many times we love to dwell in the good old days, right? Oh, you remember the good old days? I heard someone say one time, the good old days are a combination of bad memory and a good imagination. That's what the good old days are. You see, yesterday will not come back to us. Tomorrow is not promised to come. And all we have is today. That's why it's called the present. Because today is a gift to us. It is the present. Put this in your notes. This does not mean that we should not learn from the past or prepare for the future, but we must live for today. Because if you're living for the past, you are stuck. If you're living for the future, you are waiting. But if you're living for today, you are truly living. Live for today. Number 2, wisdom helps us see clearly. Let's continue on. 11, it says, wisdom is good with an inheritance and profitable to those who see the sun. For wisdom is a defense as money is defense. But the excellence of knowledge is that wisdom gives life to those who have it. Consider the work of God. For who can make straight what he has made crooked? In the day of prosperity, be joyful. But in the day of adversity, consider. Surely God has appointed the one as well as the other, so that man can find out nothing that will come after him. I have seen everything in my days of vanity. There is just a man who perishes in his righteousness, and there is a wicked man who prolongs life in his wickedness. Do not be overly righteous nor overly wise. Why should you destroy yourself? Do not be overly wicked nor be foolish. Why should you die before your time? It is good that you grasp this. It also not remove your hand from the other, for he who fears God will escape them all. Put this in your notes. One of the marks of maturity is to be able to look at life in the perspective and not out of balance. It's a great mark of maturity to be able to look at life in the proper perspective and not out of balance. Because, man, sometimes we see people living life that's unbalanced. You ever seen an unbalanced person? Yeah? And it's because they lack the perspective of a mature person to be able to see how life really works. It is that wealth of wisdom that we have. In God's wisdom, we are better equipped to see life that is ever-changing and ever-moving. So we see that the first one we see is the aspect of wealth. In verse 11 and 12, you see wisdom is better than a generous inheritance. We've already talked several times about people who have won the lottery that are not equipped to handle wealth. They're back in the poorhouse just a few years later. Wisdom is better than generous inheritance. Money can lose its value. It can be stolen, but wisdom helps us not only make money, but knows how to keep it. Most of your billionaires, your multi-millionaires, people that have successful businesses have seen probably failure in their life. They've probably had to file for bankruptcy before because of a company that didn't make it. They're not worried about whether they win or lose money on a regular basis, because sometimes in things that happen, they lose plenty of money because they know what is in between their ears is more valuable than what's in their bank account. They know that they could lose it all tomorrow, and with the knowledge that they possess, be able to make more. It's worth more than any inheritance. It's worth more than any type of windfall that we may have. You see, wisdom is better security than a financial gain, than any financial gain that we may receive. The next thing, besides wealth, is providence. See, Solomon is telling us not to fight the ways of the Lord, that God has orchestrated everything the way he wants it. What seems crooked to us, how many of us sometimes look at society or look at the things of this world and say, that's broke. That's messed up. If I were God, anybody ever said that or thought that? I would do things different. There wouldn't be this poverty, or there wouldn't be this suffering. There wouldn't be these things in the world. And we tell God this world is broken and you need to fix it. But what Solomon says here is what is crooked. Why should we make straight what maybe God has already put as crooked for whatever reason he has allowed it to be? What seems crooked may be straight to the Lord. If God wants it to be straightened out, he's going to straighten it out. He has the ability. I heard this is one thing I think they read often at Alcoholics Anonymous or some of these other 12-step programs. It's called the Serenity Prayer. Anybody ever said the Serenity Prayer before? If you haven't, here's a version of it. Oh God, give us the serenity to accept what cannot be changed, the courage to change what should be changed, and the wisdom to distinguish the one from the other. If we can adopt that in our life, I think we can live in a lot more peace. Or, as it says, serenity. The next thing we see in our notes is adversity versus prosperity. In verse 14, wisdom gives us the ability to keep things in perspective when things are difficult and keeps us from arrogance when things are great. Now, let me ask you this question tonight. What do you think, and it's kind of interesting to think what the answer might be in your mind. What do you think is more difficult to handle? Adversity or prosperity? What do you think is more difficult to handle? Think about it. Now, we all know which one we probably would rather have. We'd all rather prosper and have prosperity than adversity. But which one do you think is better, easier to handle? Now, before you just simply say prosperity, think about the problems that can come with prosperity. I've seen more people living in peace and happiness through adversity than sometimes we can see some people living in vast prosperity. All right? The answer seems on the surface to be simple, but understand what it truly means. You see, I put this in your notes. God balances us by giving us enough blessing to keep us happy and enough burdens to keep us humble. I've heard it explained like this. God gives us blessings, and we have our hands open, and he puts blessings in our hands. But if he just continued to put blessings in our hands, eventually we would have so much to hold that we would fall forward and fall down. So what does he do? He balances it by putting a few burdens on our back. Without the burdens on our back, we would never appreciate the blessings in our hand, and it would balance us back. If he just put burdens on us, we would fall backwards. But he allows the burdens to offset the blessings so that we can be a balanced person, so that we can be happy and humble. Does that make sense? So when you think about why am I going through this struggle, why am I going through this adversity, why am I going through these issues, think about it like this. If you were just blessed all the time, you probably wouldn't know how to handle it, and you would probably fall forward. You would probably fall down. So we need to understand and allow the burdens of our life to balance us and to humble us. You see, just about the time we think that we figured it all out, God changes it all on us, doesn't he? Just about the time I think I've got it all just taken care of and I've got it all figured out, God just changes. He moves the goalpost, and all of a sudden now I'm like, oh no, what am I doing? I need you, God. Before I had it all figured out on my own, now I need you again. He's like, that's where I need you. where you need to be. You see, no matter how much experience we have in this Christian journey, we must still always walk by faith. No matter how much experience, no matter how much you think you got this journey down and the pathway down, we must always and continually walk by faith. The next is righteousness and sin in verse 15 through 18. You see, there's one issue in life that demands maturity. It's the question that we always ask ourselves. I've heard it probably 1,000 times. People ask me, and I've often wondered it myself. Why, oh why, oh why, oh why, do the wicked prosper and the righteous suffer? Why does it seem like this person, man, is one of the worst people in the world, and yet they have everything? And here's another person that has lived a solid, righteous life, and yet they seem to have so little. Why do the wicked prosper and the righteous suffer? You see, the wicked only prosper if you have the perspective of a short view of life, of what is temporal, what is here. They have the reward, and that's all they're going to get. They may gain the whole world, yet lose their souls. In verse 16, Solomon is not saying that we should not be righteous. It says overly righteous. It's not saying that we should not be wise, just not overly wise. But what translates there, if we see it truly broken down, it's that we should not claim to be righteous and claim to be wise. You see, if you're righteous and you're wise, you don't have to advertise it. You don't have to sell it. You don't have to put on a t-shirt that says, I'm wise. You don't have to put on a t-shirt that says, I'm righteous. As a matter of fact, if you have to advertise it and try to convince somebody, there's a pretty good chance that it's not there. If you have to sell it to somebody, maybe you need to try to sell it to yourself. He's trying to tell us, he was condemning self-righteousness and thinking that we know it all. So in verse 18, he wants us to hold on to the true and righteousness, to truth, righteousness, and wisdom. Number 3, we're going to bring it on home, is when wisdom helps us face life stronger. It helps us face life stronger. In Ecclesiastes 7, verse 19, it says, wisdom strengthens the wise more than 10 rulers of the city. For there is not a just man on earth who does good and does not sin. Also, do not take heart at everything people say, lest you hear your servant cursing you. For many times also your own heart has known that even you have cursed others. All this I have proven by wisdom. I say, I will be wise, but it was far from me. For as that which is far off, exceedingly deep, who can find out? I applied in my heart to know, to search, to seek out the wisdom and the reason of things, to know the wickedness of folly, even the foolishness of madness. And I find more bitter than death the woman whose heart is snares and nets, whose hands are fetters. He who pleases God shall escape from her, but the sinner shall be trapped by her. Here's what I found, says the preacher, adding one thing to the other to find out the reason, which my soul still seeks, but I cannot find. One man among 1,000 I have found, but a woman among these I have not found. Truly, this is only I have found, that God made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes. Put this in your notes. A wise man fears the Lord, but not anything else. We live in a world that's afraid of so many different things, but truly the wisdom of a person fears God, and that's it. They don't have a fear of anything else. You see, if we walk in fear and in the fear and wisdom of God, then we can detect and defeat the temptations of the enemy. I put to your notes, walking with wisdom daily guides us. That word is a light into my feet, a lamp into my feet, and a light into my path, right? And it guards us. Your word have I hidden in my heart so that I might not sin against you, right? You see, we see problems, 4 problems that we face in this, that he talks about in this passage. In verse 20, he talks about the problem of sin. No one is good and is without sin. No one is without sin. Romans 3:23, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. The next thing we see when we have a problem we have is what people say about us. Verse 21 and 22. Sometimes we live in fear about what people say and that they can cripple. I talked today to Heiser Middle School. I was telling Juan earlier that what better person to talk to about 400 middle schooler girls than someone who raised 3 boys, you know? But my topic was about balance. And I took a bunch of different boxes, different size boxes, and the first box that I took out was a little cell phone box, little Apple iPhone. And I took it out, and all these girls got all excited because they thought I was about to give away an iPhone. I said, don't get twisted, it's just a box. But I said, this box represents social media. It represents the time we spend on our phone to be able to post a picture and hope and pray that someone, anyone, everyone likes it. Because we care about what people think. We care about what people say or what people post nowadays. We want them to put something good, and we want them to feel good because they're saying good, and we care about what people say about us. Solomon is addressing, now he didn't have an iPhone, but he's addressing this issue. He basically says, hey, if you listen, you're going to hear your servant curse you. And if you really pay attention, you'll see yourself cursing other people. Saying something about others. See, the fear of people can cripple someone. And we must not heed the words of gossip. What is said about others may one day be said and turned to you. The next one that we see, the problem is the inability to grasp God's meaning and purpose. You see, even Solomon could not understand all that God had. He said, I looked everywhere. And I couldn't understand all these things. I couldn't understand everything, and it drove me crazy sometimes. It literally drove Solomon crazy. He couldn't understand it all. And so I put this in your notes. A wise person knows that they do not know. Man, that might be the most important statement that we could probably get all night. The wise person knows that they do not know. It's not foolishness to say, I don't know. Sometimes it might require the most wisdom a person could possess. And then the fourth thing is the sinfulness of the world in general. Verse 26 through 29, Solomon, he uses a really good illustration, and may not be a very PC illustration. It may not be a very popular illustration in 2022. But in his day and age, it would have hit home. It would have driven home to the reader. He talks about the trappings of a lustful woman, possibly a prostitute, someone that would lure men in to get or gather the things that she wanted. And honestly, Solomon would probably know better than anybody with all the wives that he had and all the different things that had trapped him personally. So he probably would have known better than anybody. You see, this illustration that Solomon is trying to make is in that day, in that age. Women did not have the power or the prestige or the value that men had in that day and age. They weren't able to necessarily own land. They didn't have influence or power. They weren't able to voice them for themselves. Everything was run by that society of men. And so what he's trying to make is this woman, she was able to gain power through the seduction of men. That's how she got power. She got it she didn't have any power on her own, only the power that she was able to steal from the men that she had trapped in her life. What Solomon is saying is this is the same with sin. You see, the truth is, and I put it in your notes, sin in itself does not have any power. It doesn't have any power. Zero power sin has. The only power it has, it only utilizes the power that we give to it. And he's trying to use this as an example. You see, there are many snares in this world, but the one with godly wisdom knows how to navigate through the waters. And wisdom gives them the power to overcome. And then finally, he ends with saying, God made man upright. He made Adam upright. He made us to be upright. He made us to be in his image. But through folly, we have continued to lower ourselves. Through our scheming, through our different ways, our devices, we have allowed ourselves to be lowered. And God wants us to stand once again upright as his people, in righteousness, in power, and finally in the strength of the Lord. Let us pray. Today we're going to continue to pray for Kelly. We're going to continue to pray for for Junior Cersei. I want to pray for Lynn tonight, that she would continue a healing in her shoulder. And we'll pray for my son Charlie tonight. And I want to say goodbye to all the people out there. Thanks for watching. We won't see you next week. We'll see you in 3 weeks.